if we address the corporate objective only, but we don't address the personal objective or the personal emotions or the anchoring to that in an objection, what ends up happening is we miss that and we're never resolving the pain that they might have.
This is the Sales Bible Podcast, episode 357, How to Handle Objection Handling, an interview with Doug Brown.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hey, Sales Babblers, it's Pat Helmers. Very, very excited because I've got a new guest, Doug Brown, and we're going to lob various objections at objection handling. I object to this topic, and you're going to find out why. Because dealing with objections is a crucial step in winning any sale. But way too many sellers, they just fumble that situation, and instead of generating trust, they generate fear. And we all know that how you approach objection handling can be the difference between winning a deal and losing the deal. So what's the right way to approach this? You've come to the right place. Take a long breath, sit back, and listen, because Doug and I got all the answers for you. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Doug. Are you ready to babble?
I am ready to babble, Patrick. Thank you for having me here.
Well, it's an honor to have you on here. You're an author, Doug, among other things. Your book is called Win-Win Selling, Unlocking Your Power for Profitability by Resolving Objections. You have an objection to objections, right?
I do. That's how the book actually came out, from an objection of objections, actually.
So what's up with that?
So my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, I've written several books over my life, but I never published anything. So she came to me one day and said, "Hey, could I read your manuscript?" I'm like, "Okay, it's been sitting here for a year and a half or two, so why not?" So she read it, and what happened was she came back to me about 3 days later, and she started asking me questions. And she said, "Well, why'd you write the book?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to help people communicate better, because objections are just not for sales. They're for, married people, people in relationships, anybody you got to deal with, whether it's your banker or whatever." And she said, "Well, you truly want to help people?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "Oh, that's interesting." And so she asked me a few more questions. And then she then asked me another question, which was, "Hey, Doug, curious, did you really write the book for, the purpose of helping people?" And I said, "Sure, that's absolutely what I did." And she said, "Well, how are you going to help people unless you release the book?" And what I realized, Patrick, is she had been using some of the things that I was teaching in the book, actually using them with me.
Mm.
So I said, "Geez, that's a really good point." So that's how I released the book. I called up the folks. I said, "Hey, I want to publish this book out," and I hired some people to help me do that. And to my utter surprise, the book, immediately started going pretty well and became a bestseller in 4 countries and Amazon, et cetera, et cetera.
So why were you holding back? Why were you not releasing this to the world?
Because I didn't believe in myself, probably. That's what I tell myself now, right? I mean, I grew up in an environment where it was, you're great or you'll be great, but you're never going to be good enough, right? So, and I discuss a lot of this in the book, because a lot of objections, even itself objections, they come from our upbringing and our grooming coming up, right? So in my case, it was, hey, you're going to be great or be good. And I always was. I mean, I was a semi-professional, what we call soccer, right? A football player. When I was very young, I always had this ability to have this drive to want to, be competitive and be at the top. And I was that way in sales. I was that way, and that's how I kind of worked my way up into places like, becoming the independent president of sales and training for Chet Holmes, Tony Robbins, Russ Whitney, a lot of big trainers. But there was that little nagging thing in the back of my head that always said, yeah, you know what? You probably wrote a good book, but is it going to be good enough? Or a great book, is it going to be great enough? And so I would just write for the purpose of having the outlet of being able to do that. And I have a second book actually coming out in 2021, which is Fast Company or Inc. Just sent me something saying, hey, if you're coming out with this book, we might want to support it and buy 2,000 copies. So evidently good is good enough, Patrick.
There's something to be said about that it's this whole Seth Godin idea that of you should ship it. Not shipping something that's perfect is worse than shipping something that's not quite perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I subscribe to a theory that's a little if Seth's theory is shipping something, like get it out there, right?
Get it out there, use the date to motivate you, and great artists are always going to quibble with little things. You're better off to just commit and honor your word and put it out.
Well, for people hearing this is so important, right? Because I'm one of those guys, right? I mean, so, but I worked in the music industry, and I worked on a pretty high level in the music industry, working with lots of musicians, from, Aerosmith, the Billy Joel's band, to the Eagles, to Boston Extreme, a lot of well-known bands. And I remember the guys from Boston one day telling me, hey, you're a pretty good musician, right? And I remember throughout my life, hearing, you're good, but not good enough. And, I was a vocalist and a pianist. And so I'm like, man, these guys from Boston who are, on the top of the charts are telling me this. I'm like, I think I'll apply to music school. And I'm like, well, why don't I just fail big? So I'll apply to Berklee College of Music in Boston. Where the Cars went to, and, Herbie Hancock and all the other players. And so lo and behold, I apply and I got accepted first round. So here's the deal. Here's the point though, that you're making, which I would like to reaffirm. I really didn't have a clue of what I was doing. I just did it. And that good was good enough to get me into Berklee. So, and a lot of the musicians I've ever talked with, they didn't write the perfect song the first time. I mean, I didn't think Paul McCartney with Yesterday, I mean, I think there was like the first lines were, like ham and eggs or something.
That's right.
Right? So,
yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I find this really fascinating, and how we hold ourselves back. And it's interesting how you tie that into this whole idea of objections. Because when I think of, like, in the selling space of objection handling, it's like I say something and then the buyer says something to somehow wiggle out of it so they don't have to buy it. That's kind of the mindset that sellers have, which
Yep.
I think is totally wrong. But it's interesting how you're bringing this into you. It's something that you're telling yourself so you could wiggle out of it and not publish the book.
Right. And here's the thing: when we're selling to someone else, and we have these rote or written down, memorized lines, and they say this, you say that. The challenge with that is it's not dealing with the psychological underpinnings of which is actually causing the objection in the first place, which is they're uncomfortable about something, right? There's some level of discomfort or fear in the process. So when we parrot back one of those lines, like, the price is too high. Did I just hear you say the price is too high? That type of thing, which is taught, that can actually drive more fear into the situation that's going on with the communication. And now the person who wants to buy from that other person or buy from the seller is now going into a full-blown fear pushback. And the buyer is recoiling, but the seller is the one who created that recoil. So psychologically, if you will, what happens is the buyer anchors that, oh, this person's pushing me or in high fear state now because of this person. So it's no longer about the objection. It's now about that dirty, rotten seller on the other side of the table who's trying to manipulate me.
Yeah. So if I hear what you're saying right, is that objection handling is not about rhetoric or logic or who can one up somebody, like in a
like in a competitive sport or of a competitive verbal contest,
Yeah.
like crushing the
Yeah,
objection.
what do they call those competitive verbal contests?
Debate.
Debates. That's the word. It's not that, right?
No, it is the reason I named the book Win-Win Selling is because we're supposed to be selling win-win. What does win-win mean? That means they win, we win, right? If they win, we lose, we usually sell something for less than we wanted to, or we got beat up in the sale. If we win and they lose, we've usually sold them something that they probably don't need, or we've overcharged them, or whatever it might be on the value proposition, right? So, and I'm a big proponent on selling on value and selling at very high profit. So, it's okay to sell something high profit, high margin, as long as the value is there. That's, in line with that. But win-win is about win-win. And so when we're in a debate, that's fine to be in a healthy debate where people don't feel like they're getting beat up. But as soon as they feel, they're getting beat up, they're going to go into defense mode. And frankly, most of the buyers that we approach, or the potential buyers, they have circumstances in their life that are creating a positioning for them. And it could be, hey, I've been, taken by a seller before. And so I'm not going to get taken again, because if I get taken again, I have this public embarrassment that might be within my company, or I might hurt my company, or I might hurt my cash flow, or, this might affect my marriage, or whatever it might be that's going on in their head, because behind every corporate objective is always a personal objective. And so if we address the corporate objective only, but we don't address the personal objective or the personal emotions or the anchoring to that in an objection, what ends up happening is we miss that, and we're never resolving the pain that they might have.
Yeah. So how do we approach buyers when we hear these kinds of things?
Well, the first thing that I always teach people is, take a breath, right? Because I think you said earlier in the conversation, that people, when they hear something, they're supposed to say something. And that's the natural tendency, right? To try to overcome what's going on, because that's a lot of the old scripting sales training. And the truth be told today, that buyers have more options to buy from us than ever before. And they don't even need a salesperson sometimes. They can go, there's this little magical thing called the internet, right? And so they can research and have more information on what they're looking to purchase, more sometimes than actually the actual selling party. So please understand, those who are listening to this, that the people have the information. There's no longer this information disparity, where before, if you went to buy I'm not going to beat up on the car industry, but just, when I was a young guy, there were 3 dealerships that I could go to: Ford, Chevy, and maybe one foreign dealership, right? But I didn't know anything about the car. They knew everything. But now we have all kinds of things with Carfax and everything else that I know the history on the car before I even go there. I can even tell what the dealer paid for it in most cases and what the dealer incentives are. So I'm armed with a lot of information, and buyers today are armed with far more information than they used to be. So trying to crush an objection is not going to work. There's a time for that where you can call them out, but you've got to build massive rapport before you even get there.
So let's talk about that. So maybe you could walk us through the right way of doing this.
Sure. First thing, take a breath. Breathe. The reason you take a breath is because once you take that breath, it interrupts the natural tendency to want to overcome it. Second thing, get curious, not confrontational. So what does that mean? That means I want you to think of that objection as a butterfly in a little child's hand who's looking at this butterfly thinking, how does this thing think? How does it fly? Why are their wings shaped like this? What do the colors mean? These type of questions. So if we can get our frame to interrupt the pattern immediately, and then what we're doing is we're thinking curiosity questions, we're now setting ourselves up to have an open, natural conversation. Even if it's a debate, it's going to be far more healthy because people are going, okay, this person's actually trying to figure out what's going on without being, they're being inquisitive versus being, the person who comes top down. So the third thing is think before you open your mouth. Because if you don't, then it's a natural tendency for them to say something. You might get the conversation going, but then when they say something, it's natural to not breathe again. And you want to go back and just start resolving or crushing it down or stopping the objection, right? It's not a metaphorical arm lock, folks, because if you get into this unhealthy debate, it's going to be a metaphorical arm lock between you and the buyer. So the fourth thing is just start asking questions. What kind of questions? Questions of curiosity. Think about how a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old asks questions. Now, we don't want to use our little person voice, but the reality is we want to think like that. So in sales, a lot of times we're asked, we're taught to ask open-ended questions. So open-ended questions, those that don't just elicit a no or yes or a one-word response, are the best type of questions to ask. Next point, ask the questions people will never dare ask them.
Oh.
Because
so what kind of questions are those?
If you're dealing, for example, with a CEO of a company, and the CEO says something like, we're doing pretty darn good. We grew by 20% last year. It's a natural tendency for somebody to go, oh, well, that's not that bad, right? But instead of that, the tough question would be, that's really, really a respectful number. And I can appreciate that. The question I have is, should that have been maybe 34%? And you just sit there and let it sit, right? Till they answer. So should that have been maybe 34%? Do you think there's an opportunity that you could have had more growth than you actually had, but maybe you don't understand how that could have worked out? CEOs love questions like that. So you gently are pushing back, yes, but you're asking a question of curiosity. Or, ma'am or sir, I'm very curious to understand how you achieved that 20%. And do you think that there was maybe some more option for growth there, maybe 30, 35%? Do you think that's potential? And if so, would you describe to me how that looks in your mind? Something like that. Now, if you just ask the first part of the question, which is a close-ended question, but you want the description to go on, you want to get these people talking because that's how fear comes down. And you want to look for what I call the real it, Patrick, the real it being, what is the real reason for the objection? Because it's not just a corporate objective most of the time.
I've always had it in my mind that objections were just people saying, I don't fully understand this. Could you tell me more?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying is exactly what you just said. I don't fully understand this. From the buyer's perspective, they're saying the same thing. I don't fully understand this. Could you tell me more? And I'm fearful that this is going to hurt me in some way. And that's why, emotion, energy in motion, quote Tony Robbins, right? So, but we hear an objection a lot of times that's not the real objection because they're trying to cover it up with the emotion that they're actually feeling, but they're not going to come out to you and say, I am so scared to tell you this, right? As a seller, they tend not to do that. So what they'll do is they'll tend to throw out things to protect themselves. And a lot of times it'll come out in an emotional state. You can hear it in their voice. They're either stressed or they're happy or they're laughing or whatever. So pay attention to the auditory cues that are going on as well as the facial if you're actually looking there, and get curious and say, geez, I wonder what would cause somebody to ask. What could be the top 3 reasons somebody would ask that question? Pose that objection. What might they be thinking? Yeah. And then you can start forming your questions off of that.
So if we were to distill this all down to the bottom and to the bare essence, you really just don't believe in objection handling, and it's not really something you think salespeople should even be thinking of.
I don't think they should be positioning in a routine way to handle objections.
Like when I was new to sales, I was told by my manager, make a list of 20 things that people object to and have an answer for all of them. so that you would hear it, you kind of memorize, and you would repeat back. And I think you said something similar to this earlier in the conversation. That because I want to be crystal clear here in this episode that what you're saying is don't do that. Right?
what I'm saying is you can be prepared for that, but don't make that as your primary line, because you, and to your point, don't do that, right? Because we want to know what objections are coming out. So part of the game is, okay, what are the top 20 or 30 objections that you might get? But what we don't want to do is just have routine route answers for that, because every person's different. Every person had think about it. If somebody grew up in an environment, which is something I grew up in as well, like you negotiate pretty much anything, even when you win, you know. So if they grow up in an environment where everything was negotiated, and I've seen salespeople do this, I've been sitting in meetings with them and hear them do this, and the buyer goes, okay, yeah, we're good. So instead of them pushing the paper in front of them to get the signature to get going, they start negotiating again. So if you're dealing with a buyer that's used to that, you must know that that's where their frame comes from. And you're only going to find that out by asking questions on and around those subject matters. So if you have this routine answer, like, they say this, you say that, you don't get there. And so what ends up happening? They end up throwing another smokescreen objection out, or another smokescreen, right? And a lot of times it does come down to basic things like, money, time. But really all objections are straightforward in one fact. They're all based in some small or some large root of fear. All of them. They're not curiosity. They're like saying, I'm objecting because I'm uncomfortable. I mean, if you even think, Patrick, and, Your Honor, I object, right? Why are they saying that? Because that attorney is going, this is going in the wrong direction. Right? And they're fearful they're going to lose the case or lose ground with the jury or with the judge or whatever. So they're objecting. And that's how people work. So this is more about understanding how people communicate and like to communicate, and how they work in communication than the word objection. Because I don't even like the word objection, quite frankly.
Yeah.
It's just they're expressing some discomfort.
Yeah, I agree. Doug, how can people find you online?
They can go to www.businesssuccessfactors. I just heard my Boston accent come out there. Factors.com. They can send me an email if they want to doug@businesssuccessfactors.com. If they want to get a copy of the book, they can go to Amazon, or they can go to winwinsellingbook.com, and they can get it for shipping and handling. We'll send it out to them. Or they can go to my LinkedIn, which is Doug Brown 1234 at LinkedIn.
You've got a new book coming out, you said, called Fast Company. What's that about?
No, Fast Company is the company that got a hold of me to actually potentially support the book, which was weird. It's a good entity to support a book. So I wrote a whole book on how to increase sales revenues in any company. There's about 28 different ways of increasing revenues and profits within the business. So that's what I did.
Well, we'll keep on top of that. When's the target?
April right now.
Oh, that's soon.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out right now whether or not we're going to self-publish it or bring it to a publisher, but because we've had some response from publishers themselves. Part of me just wants to self-publish it to get it out there because I don't want it sitting there another 6 or 12 months, but we'll see. But April's the date at this point.
Awesome. Doug, thank you very much for babbling here on Sales Babble. Really appreciate it.
Patrick, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, this is something I really feel strongly about, because objection handling does not equal debate. It's not a battle between you and the buyer. Objections are just requests for more information. That's how I've always seen it. To find Doug and his Business Success Factors website, as well as his book, Win-Win, on Amazon, you can find those links in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. Before I go, I want to share that last week Brad Woody sent me an email, and it was incredibly kind. He was talking about the Rajiv Nathan episode on elevator pitches. He said, quote, "Generally, blogs and podcasts just remind me of things that I've forgotten, which is not a bad thing in itself. But many of your guests have introduced me to new ideas and new concepts. Today, Rajiv really opened my eyes. You've got the best content on the internet, my friend. Not only do you have fantastic guests, but you have become an aggregation of all their knowledge. You reign." Jeez, that's so nice of him. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Brad. Really appreciate it. So if you feel strongly about this podcast, just as Brad does, don't hesitate to share it with your friends. Go on the podcast app and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. If you want to leave us a 5-star review, please do. If you want to leave us a lower star review, never mind, you can move along. That's all we've got for this week, folks. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.